was more sort of growing up in my family values. Um, there was a real sense of fairness built into especially from my father. He was a real advocate for everyone's equal. People are treated fairly and with kindness and with compassion, um, and I don't know, somehow that, even though he didn't preach it, it just seemed to get ingrained in me. So that I think always led me to um, making things work. And I feel drawn, I know it doesn't seem like that, like running a business or developing something, helping develop something like QABA and all its infrastructure. But when you are driven by you wanting things to work fairly and right, I'm very drawn to those things for that. I know they don't seem to go together, but they do. That is quite a story. So I was a family therapist and as a master's and wanted to be a therapist and did that for a little while. But I think I was much more drawn to a more exact science, was more curious about how things work. So when I went back for a doctoral program, I went into neuropsychology, and then, which I had a little bit of applied behavior analysis there, but to be frank, the person who taught behavior theory in my particular school was a little old school, was a little bit super smart, but was a little bit phoning it in, just from being, maybe an elderly professor who just did their thing. So I had a rudimentary understanding of applied behavior analysis, enough to pass the test. But then I got an internship for my doctorate, wanting to work with kids, wanting to work in developmental disabilities, or at the time I had a specialty in head injury. Ended up getting an internship at the Kennedy Krieger Institute at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And they wanted me, they're very, very behavioral. This is probably one of the more, I don't want to say strict, but true to applied behavior analysis inpatient programs in the world. I wasn't attracted to that necessarily. It was just attracted to pediatrics and developmental disabilities. But they wanted me because I had a family therapy background, and none of their other students did. They were all hardcore behaviorists from Virginia and the big schools in behavior. So I was quite the fish out of water, and I learned most of applied behavior analysis from my fellow interns who guided me from postdocs and from interns and the supportive professors, but I really learned on the job from my fellow colleagues who were very patient with me. But I really took to it. I loved the exact science of, not that it's exact, but compared to what I was doing before, it was very exact. Military, I went into because I was interested in being a pilot. Way back, I had a sense of duty and I wanted to be a pilot. But back then, women had to compete nationally for slots instead of locally like men do. It might be different now. And I just never got a slot. I'm not very good in math. I probably have a pretty moderately severe math disability, to be honest. And I just couldn't ever pull myself up on those scores. But I thought, well, but the military will lead me to what my real goal was to get a master's and maybe a doctorate. I wanted more school. And I was didn't have any money, and that ROTC seemed like a way to get them, go in, get get service, become an adult, be able to pay my own way, which, Um, so then I just went back into psychology, which was what I was kind of attracted to all along. So the military, I think, gave me some financial support. It gave me some serious discipline. I was pretty shy. It gave me a lot of confidence, and um, I think that's probably where the sort of if you build it, they will come sort of attitude that I had in building a business or taking on something that was just in development, like QABA or whatever. I think it helped with that. I think it was more like that understanding how things work is comforting. That's probably how I manage my curiosity and my, any anxiety I have or whatever, is understanding how to make sense of the world. And neuropsychology to me is the ultimate of that. How do we work? Why do things do what they do? Why do we do what we do? Um, and so I think that's what attracted me to neuropsychology, is just the fascination of the science of how we work and what we know and don't know. Having a context and a construct within which to view the world and put language to it helps people. But then something like applied behavior analysis has such strong validity and reliability science behind it, makes it extra I don't want to say comforting, but it makes extra sense. It's not just a theory, it's proven. At the time I lived in the state of Maryland, and Maryland did not have a way to join the sort of Medicaid insurance world of waivers for children with autism, but knew that they did. So they went and I don't really know, can't at this point, it's been too long to understand how they maneuvered, but finally found their way into that world through an autism waiver, which a few other states had done the same thing. There are different kind of Medicaid waivers to serve autism. Ours was specifically very, I don't want to say narrow, because it wasn't narrow compared to what we have, but it did certain things. It was, community services, after school, one-to-one care outside of the school, family training, support therapy outside of school. And at the time I was at Kennedy Krieger running the LEAP program, which was a school program for severe behavior disorders. And I got involved in Maryland's, it wasn't necessarily volunteer. I got asked by the principal to go to these early meetings of Maryland trying to develop this program as somebody who understood the world clinically about what they were doing, and then got really fired up about it. And so I ended up leaving Kennedy once it all got going, had a young family at that time, and decided to sort of start my own company for the autism waiver programs. Did that for a couple of years, and from that saw the need for more early intervention, which then turned into an early intervention clinic add-on, which then the county asked us to add a non-public school part, and it just kept adding on from there. And then I've sold it since, and I think they've added, I'm pretty sure they've added a high school and some other outpatient clinics. Back then, it was that there's no money, there was zero money for families There was no insurance coverage. You have to remember this was a while ago, not just when I retired, but I've been doing that for 15 years before that. So there was no services outside of school services, and I felt like there just was not a cohesive, I don't know if that's a good word. Um, I'm thinking of how to say it. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. I think it's natural as we learn more about anything that when you look back, you go, God, I can't believe they did that, right? That's in any career field. But I was seeing more cutting edge research and ability to treat autism and communicative disorders in a better way, and think that you could do it without breaking the bank, so to speak. Yes, it costs a lot of money, but seeing that you really need to put the money in early, the time in, and how much that paid off and saved the whole system, schools, insurance companies, everybody later. I didn't win that battle, by the way, but maybe I was the beginning of that awakening one day. So in the early days, I think it was finance and just getting staff who knew what they were doing. There were times when I came into a program and early in my career, and if the teacher would be doing her own thing, and right next door a teacher was doing something else. They were both not bad, but now this kid can't go over there and to the next class or to the next class, because everybody was just sort of doing their own thing to their own personality, and it was all sound treatment, but there was like no cohesiveness to anything or real theory behind it, or no built-in training of staff to move up. It was, if your kid happened to get a good teacher, good for you, and if they got one that was still sort of floundering and to make sense of it, then whoops, too bad. It was just, that's how it was in a new field. To me, the biggest challenge is getting people, teachers, instructors, parents, the system, the funding sources to buy in that good cohesive treatment not only makes a difference, but what that does for a lifetime of care for all of us is a benefit. You spend, and I think I even did some numbers for you spend $500,000 now, will save 3 million later for a system. And I don't just mean financially, I mean that, behaviorally and clinically too. I recently, or this year, have been helping my niece deal with her now 4-year-old child, and that challenge of her, watching somebody I know pretty well listen to the school system who's like, well, let's see. And I'm like, no, you need to throw everything at it now. You can't wait till he's 6. You can't wait till he's 7. You can't do 30 minutes of speech a week for a child who's barely talking, and we're still fighting that challenge of people understanding the path of least resistance is not the way to treat behavior problems in children. It's more now, it's like life insurance. You pay now so you don't pay later. I was retired. I didn't want any part of anything. I had become a yoga teacher, and I was just sort of in a different world. And a friend of mine was one of the original investors. Actually, somebody that I sort of mentored and went and did her own business. And she sort of introduced me to it. And I just decided, and I met a few people, and just decided, I'll do it because they needed development. And that's probably what I'm good at. I'm not as good at the day-to-day running of things. I'm better at the visionary development part of things. So I warned them that I'm a little bit authoritarian in my leadership style. And, but I think that's what they needed at the time. Probably not in the later years, but in the early years, that's probably what they needed, is just somebody who, too many cooks in the kitchen doesn't get anything done in the very early days, in my opinion. I mean, I think the challenge is you only know what you know. And I think helping people understand that it's okay not to know everything creates an environment of learning and growth. I also think that you have to take training in the same attitude that you take clinically managing a client's case, shaping it along. They want to feel mastery. How do they get that? Letting them feel the intuitive reinforcement of each of those mastered things. To me, that's the biggest challenge. I think that people say, here's what you're supposed to know, go do it, see ya, bye. As opposed to letting it be this big dynamic thing and treating staff in the same way that you would have the clinical respect that you would for a client. I love the idea that there are options out there, because a little competition creates more integrity for all. I'm hoping they have that impact, getting more people interested in it as a career or as a jump start to some life, from one career to a next or into adult life, or even if they don't make it a career. That's how I looked at my employees. Like, this is a great training ground for any job that you do, because it's making you the kind of person that knows how to learn, you become part of a team, you recognize your own strengths and weaknesses in a safe environment, all these things that can happen through training and learning something, whether they do this for a lifetime or not. These are what you learn in the ABA impacts everything in your life, whether you're doing it as a career or not. But I'm hoping that the QABA, again, being out there and caring that it's a good program and that it's competitive credentialing and trying to stay on top of the latest stuff, I think that that's good for ABA in general. It's easy to get rigid. It's easy to get just doing the same thing because it seems like it's working, as opposed to staying open and curious. And it's hard to do when you're doing that kind of hardcore data-driven science, to be open and curious at the same time. And that's a challenge. And I think, having credentialing and people like get more training. What about this? What about that? Keep stirring that pot. If all you did was say, oh, I got my license, I'm done, or I'll just phone in some CEUs, which is, what I always worry about. I think that's the problem, credentialing boards, you don't want to make it hard, but how do you creatively keep people curious and interested and feel pride about what their credential? It's very recognizable and something that somebody might want, that says, look at that. I could become credentialed to work with people. And these people are so user-friendly and guide me along. I don't know where we were, but we were looking at, sort of study manuals and all that other stuff. I'm not going to compare it to other places, but keeping everything really that makes sense and in tune with you got to practice what you preach and walk the walk. And my personal opinion is the major credentialing company at the time did not always do that. I don't think that was necessarily on purpose. I just think it's easy to let it get away from you.